Good morning, just back from my morning ramble. I don't think I would do it unless my wife made me do it. Well, made me do it's probably not the right thing, but she always calls me. She's downstairs and I'm in bed still, and she would call me and say, "I'm going for a walk in 10 minutes. Are you coming?" Ah, all right. And I remember there's a thing I've got every Thursday that a reminder that came up yesterday, and I didn't have time to open it up. But it's one of these. It's a mental health, physical fitness kind of reminder with a couple of things I need to do, and normally I just ignore it. Things that are important for you. Yeah, just don't have time for that. Anyway, yesterday it reminded me it was overdue, and I thought, okay, I'll check it out. And there was one comment that says, walk until it feels good. And that's just me with walking. I go out and I think, oh, how long is this? Oh, and then it gets to the first kilometre, and I'm like, have we still got to go? Have we got to go round that? And then by the time I get home, I feel great. So yeah, walk until you feel good is a good mantra. So as you may have seen from the video intro, I'll clip something into it, but basically we went around a different route, which has got the deer, it's got the lake, and the swans and ducks and all that, and a lot more to see. Normally it's too marshy to go that way, but it was nice this morning, so yeah, it's fantastic. It really feel good today. So I had a couple of things when I was thinking on my way around. I can't talk too much about cybersecurity because I don't want to tell the world exactly what we're doing, but I can generically share some of the things that are important to everyone, and I'm sure everyone is looking at the detail, but just in case there's some small and medium businesses that are getting a bit lost in what they should be doing, then maybe this might be helpful to them. But I'm sure the large companies are definitely focusing on these particular areas. But first of all, I wanted to sort of, take you back a little bit, as I always do, and talk about when I worked for IBM when I was about 20 odds, so yeah, I had been made redundant twice from jobs in Glasgow. So I thought, my sister got me a job over in South Africa, and I went over there and I quit within a week because it was just rubbish. I was coming down a grade. So I took another job and with a mining company, and it allowed me to learn more about distributing networks, and because they had computer centres in every single South African city, Port Elizabeth, Knysna, Kimberley, Pretoria, Johannesburg, so it was all the way over. So I had to actually distribute their, I think it was an IBM 3274, I think it was. I seem to remember. It was basically a control unit, the equivalent, if you like, of a router within each of the different areas. So and you had to configure those routers to, in the same way you do with Cisco routers. You had to configure them to say where they were and what your addresses were, etc., in order to communicate with the centres. And I would do that as well. So great experience. And when I came back to IBM, when I came back to UK and I joined IBM, and the reason I came back actually is an interesting one, just quite an interesting aside, is after 2 years in South Africa, because you'd immigrated there to get work, they made you a South African citizen, and being under the age of 25 at the time, they said, right, now you're going to enter the army. I said, right, am I? Bye. So I left in the mid-80s, 84 it was, and joined IBM because there was no way I was fighting what was an internal war for another country that I just didn't believe in. So I left and came back to join IBM, and learned a lot there as well, because at that stage it was still SNA, so the IP was just over the coming around the corner. But everything was IBM's systems network architecture, which effectively was its own protocol, pre-IP. And my job was to basically break everything on the network and understand what it did. At a data scope, or equivalent of today's sniffer or Wireshark. So I had a data scope, but these were 30,000 quid's devices, more like an oscilloscope in terms of its size, and that would be plug it into the network, and then you'd understand everything that's going on. It would do some work for you to interpret the bits and the bytes and the hex codes, etc., and it tell you what the protocol was. So I had to understand. I know there was something in IBM at the time. I'm not sure if it's what they do at the moment, but they certainly had a methodology that said what should happen and what doesn't happen. So in other words, to solve things, you have to basically make sure you know what should happen, and then work out what does happen, and then there's a difference. So I used to do that from a protocol perspective, and actually look at the data transfers, data traffic between maybe an IBM System 36 at the time and an IBM mainframe, and let's look at the traffic between there and unravel it, and what should happen. Well, it should do this, it should say, acknowledge and then send back the next bit of traffic. So, you would then understand what should happen, document it. The help desk would have that, but I would then document what happens if I break it, what happens if I pull that plug out, what happens if I switch it off, what happens if we lose the line or whatever, and then I would document what does happen there, and therefore, when it came to the help desk, they were able to see any of the problem areas and how to get out of them. And it was really good lesson on at the engineering level. So when I went on to work with the Royal Bank on a contract, and that was my first contract in 1985 or something like that, so it was about 30 odd years. I was 35, maybe more years I was contracting. Incredible. But that first contract was to integrate the first 4 bank network. So that was Barclays, Lloyds, Bank of Scotland and Royal Bank of Scotland. And this was the first time it was ever been done, and so I was representing Royal Bank at the time, and we had to configure the equivalent of today's routers. Front-end processors were called then, IBM 3745s maybe. Well, that's going way back. I don't know whether that would come out or not. So at the time, we had to have a look at the problems we're getting, etc. But I got some time somebody asked me to look at the logs, and then I looked at the logs, and key tip, look at logs. Understand what messages, understand what's being chucked out as errors. And I looked at these logs and I thought, that's unusual. There's a lot of errors here on the ATMs. Why is that? And it turned out, and I'd done some analysis, I'm quite a detailed person, so I jump in, find out exactly where these errors were, and it turns out they were all ATMs, and they were falling over, they were stopping working, intermittently during the day. And I thought, and what then that meant was the ATM would be closed. You wouldn't be able to, you go up to it with your card and it wouldn't be there. And I thought, there's something wrong about that. And then I worked on it overnight in my head, and I started to do a bit of research on what that message was, and why it actually would do that. And then I worked out that it was probably as a result of at the time analog lines, the copper lines that we had at the time, that traversed the country. There wasn't digital networks in those days, and it was probably due to the poor quality in those particular areas. So I then worked out that actually I could configure that to say retry a little bit longer, instead of actually just crashing. Try it again, and there was 3 parameters around that. When I found that out, and the various people within the senior managers at the time realised that the impact was thousands of cash machines were actually going out of service on a regular basis, possibly for years, until I got there. and I had spotted this problem. So they got a big meeting around, and like 40, 50 people came into the meeting room in Fettes Row, which some of you may well remember, which is now being demolished. I think it was this year they demolished that after all these years. But yeah, one of the rooms I remember vividly, you know, up at the first floor, where everybody came around and wanted to know what this was. There's little old me with a whiteboard. You know, I think I was in 20 something, putting up a whiteboard. Yeah, it works like this, and this is how I did it, and so they were all impressed, suitably impressed, like, oh, brilliant, excellent, what, and then that means oh, fantastic, oh, great. And they all went away and they told their story to various business people and executives, and you know, I was a hero for the day. Now, I always remember, I think the guy's name was Andy Mullen, I always remember Andy Mullen saying to me afterwards, once everybody disappeared from, you know, from view, and gone on to their various things, he said, he brought me back down to earth, and he said, success has many fathers, failure is an orphan. Now, if you ever think you're actually done a really good job, that statement will bring you right back down to earth. It was fantastic. It was spot on, and right to this day, I remember that particular statement. You do get a lot of friends when you've actually sort of solved something, or you know, it's like a kids' football team. You know, everybody goes for the ball. They love the ball. Let's go for the ball. Oh, they all go to the same ball, but nobody actually sort of spreads out. So anyway, yeah, that was it. Now, the reason I say that again, you know, I've got notes up here. I'm putting them up there, so I'm just checking on them. So log message is important. So, you know, that's obviously key to finding out what's going on. Be obsessive about it. I mean, engineers that are out there listening to this, the young engineers, you know, not the old boys like me, but you should be, you know, getting an OCD on log messages, and actually, because that's the value, that's where you find out where things are going wrong, and if it's going wrong particularly continuously, then there's something fundamental going wrong. You should be fixing that. But anyway, the other thing was, so at the time, you know, IPA networks came along, and it was any to any, and then okay, then we bring in firewalls, because we can't have any to any, because we need to basically know which IP addresses can talk to which other IP addresses. Okay, so firewalls became everywhere. but these days, the funny thing is, it's kind of going back to my days in IBM, where I knew I'd control. I was a systems programmer, I was a development systems programmer, there's one production guy up in Warwick, and that's it. That was us, and we knew everything on IBM's, you know, network, and this was a network for customers, which is obviously massive now. But it was just the beginning of it, and that was it. But these days, there's hundreds and thousands of different people involved, and it's quite hard to get back to basics, which is basically understand what's on your network, the equipment that's on your network. Understand it, understand where it is, how it's configured, and you know, the serial numbers, the addresses on it, the MAC addresses. Understand everything about it, and then, because you couldn't connect something without actually configuring it into the central system, so we knew everything, and we would document, you know, exactly where everything was. So if you know that, which is kind of basic, but many large companies actually grow up and they don't actually have a good asset management system, which is saying exactly what is where everywhere. And then the configuration, they don't have that configuration information, so you've got to build that. You've got to understand how every system is configured, and is it configured to the best possible latest releases, etc. And then, you know, these days we're actually putting in things like DDoS and WAF, and we're actually understanding, you know, how the traffic is, what the traffic looks like between an end device and the network and the application. And so you're understanding what that looks like in order to, you know, in other words, what should happen, and you're understanding what should happen and making sure anything what does happen, in other words, something unusual from the norm, is actually plugged and say, no, that's a bit unusual, that shouldn't be there, I'm going to stop that particular bit of traffic, and that's all we're doing now. is actually plugging, you know, the holes that are founded by IP. IP is wonderful. It opens up the world, but you lose control as a sort of systems programmer or a central entity. You had to lose all that, and then, you know, now we're trying to gather it all in, and we're actually, you know, and some of the things we're doing at the moment is the equivalent of firewalls on servers. You know, that's where we've got to, you know, knowing what traffic should go between applications and only allowing that particular traffic to flow between A and B. And that way, you know, you're locking down things the way things used to be. But hey, it takes us 40 years to learn all that. So I think that was it for and lock it down. Yeah. So that's my card over. Hopefully that ramble was useful to some people, and remember I ramble even more with a bit of music on lomanradio.com. So come and listen. Speak soon.